I'm Angela Burgess, and we're interviewing Gary Stuart today about family constellation work. Gary's been a facilitator all over the world, and we are talking today about family constellation work and how this new modality, which is about a whole new level of humanity, can actually help to dissolve and break family patterns. Gary, this has been fascinating so far, actually.
Great.
Really.
Thank you.
So I'd like to kind of recap for a moment that we are talking about the work that is done blindly, meaning that there is no information given to the representatives who come in and agree to be helpful in helping a client work on their present day issue, and information starts to come through these people. And yet, they have no information, so the mind can't be creating it. It is opening up from what we're calling the morphogenic field.
Yes, absolutely.
And does everyone have the ability to be a representative and have the field work through them?
Yes. Yep. No
Have you ever seen anyone who it doesn't happen for, does not work for?
Well, that can be the information. Ironically, when I was working some of my first constellations, every time someone represented my father in my own constellation, not me, well, I did as well, just to see how it felt to be in his shoes, so to speak, they said they didn't feel anything. And the facilitator said, this is ridiculous, somebody always feels something. Then I said, well, you try standing in that spot where my particular father was. She said, I don't feel anything either. So the information from that being, which he was frozen in trauma, that's why he wasn't feeling anything, which thawed out over me doing the work, is that whatever I'm not feeling is information from that person in the field. So that's the information from that aspect. That could be money, that could be father, that could be something. So because someone isn't feeling it doesn't mean that that's not information. That's an active part of the constellation field.
It could be a very big part of the answer to this specific situation and what caused it. Interesting. Gary, can you give us a personal example of how a constellation actually affected you or maybe your relationship with a family member?
Yes, absolutely. I discovered this about 10 years ago, so I was a client first, and I was so enthralled with it that I became a facilitator 2 years later. And this was about 1998, so it's getting on 10 years, and I enjoy the work thoroughly. So one thing that came up in my field, I even forget the issue I was working on. I think it was money or success or whatever. And the facilitator, she does it the old-fashioned way, where she assigned roles. This is the mother, this is the father, this is money, this is whatever. And she came up and whispered to me, it looks like there was some incest in your mother's childhood. And I had an inkling that there was. And so ironically we went with that, and I had never told my mother. I didn't tell any family member about it. About 6 weeks after the constellation, my sister started calling me saying she's happy, she's not angry anymore.
You meaning your mother?
My mother, in real life. Now, she never heard I did the work. She didn't know that I was working on the incestuous impulses that came up during my constellation, which wasn't about that. It just is in my field because that's an incomplete issue in her that I inherited, being the first generation born from her and my father's marriage. So here she wasn't even there to see the work, but a surrogate processed all that information about incestuous events that happened in my mother's life as a little girl. It turns out at 4 years old that was released here in my work, and the reaction, the positive reaction to it, showed up in her life.
And yet you had not spoken to her about
No.
this. And was your mother in any way that you know of in any kind of therapy herself?
No, never her whole life.
Interesting. And yet the effect that was being worked on for you here on this coast affected your mother somehow energetically.
Yes.
Because she's connected to you DNA?
Exactly.
wise?
Absolutely.
So people who are connected to us through DNA, through blood, through family, are going to be affected by any work that we do.
Absolutely.
That helps
Yes.
me in my present situation, also helps a family member. Just because the energy connection through our DNA.
Yes, absolutely. And don't forget, we as human beings in our immediate family have a conscious field. So you talked before about morphogenic field, which Rupert Sheldrake, a quantum physicist, matter has a field around it. So our whole family has a field around it. Our nation has a field around it. So everything is interconnected by energy, which quantum physicists are certainly discovering. So it's almost like every family system is like a mini solar system. And the mother and father are the sun and the moon, and the kids are the little planets rotating around. Well, there's a conscious field that holds that all together, almost very magnetically. And we find in the work there's a magnetism that shows up in the room, almost like gravity or anti-gravity is present while we do the work. Literally moving people around like a chessboard sometimes.
Interesting. Yes, I've seen it. That kind of helps to explain the expression that we've all heard, that things run in the family. And in this case, we're seeing that it's not just physical attributes, but it can be health, and it could be emotional things, mental things, states, but also the consequences of our ancestors, the people who came before us, and all their unresolved issues are also the downloads that we get. Unbelievable. It's
Yes.
very, very interesting. Gives us a fuller picture. Interesting.
Yes, the picture it really gives us is a multi-dimensional picture of our family system, of our incarnation on Earth. And if our families have that field and our nations have that field, that means Earth has a field of consciousness as well, which I believe in 2012 is the forthcoming realization that everything is about consciousness.
So this is a newly discovered, at least for the last 3 decades, newly discovered layer of consciousness that people can actually access and work with. Gary, this has been fascinating.
Great,
Once
thank
again,
you.
thank you so much.
Great, my pleasure.